Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Bridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothic's number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. April Fool's Day 2020. Josh and I decided to get outside and hit a local trail since the morning was going to be nice and sunny. It was also a good time for Josh to finally complete his Saranac Lake Sixer hiking challenge. A challenge he started probably 6 or 7 years ago and just never finished. He only had one mountain left to hike, and since this mountain seems to have a bad reputation due to not having any views, which is completely not true, it was never too high on his priority list, so he just never climbed it. I, however, had remembered enjoying this hike a lot, so today we drove the 5 minutes over to Brook to hike Scarface Mountain, the most underrated hike in the Adirondack Park. Scarface Mountain stands just over 3,000 feet elevation and is a roughly 7.5-mile out-and-back hike with 1,600 feet of gain starting in Brook. A terrific trail that takes you through a tall pine forest, Christmas tree farm like spruce groves, and more before a gradual ascent along a river. The climb is surrounded by hardwoods before coming out onto an open-faced rock ledge with front-row views of the western high peaks and the Sawtooth Range. Once here, the trail traverses along the ridge to the true wooded summit, an underrated mountain that deserves more praise than it receives on a trail worth hiking time and time again. Josh picked me up around 10:30 a.m. and we drove over to Brook, just past the Brook Brew House where we turned left, and the trailhead is a few feet up the road from this intersection. We pulled into an empty trailhead parking lot, though there was one other car parked along the road with one hiker getting ready for the morning as we arrived. The weather was nice and clear today with temperatures in the high 30s, low 40s for the day. Ideal spring-like hiking temperatures. It seemed like we were going to need to put our micro spikes on from looking at the start of the trail, since the middle of the trail itself was an icy slab thanks to the winter's melting snow packed down on the trail, but the forest around was completely melted and bare. We decided, however, to skip the spikes to start, since we had a hunch the trail would be mostly bare after this first section. And we were partially right. Just partially. We grabbed our packs, and a few minutes later we began the hike. We skipped signing in today due to the whole COVID-19 ordeal, in an effort to not touch anything with our hands or gloves as much as possible. So no trail register sound effect on this podcast today. Okay, here's one for old time's sake. The trail, as expected, was mostly melted, about 20 yards up from the trailhead, and for the entire approach to the mountain before climbing up was a mix of long, melted stretches with no snow or no ice anywhere, then followed by shorter stretches of ice slabs in the middle of the trail, and then melted, and then ice slabs. The slabs were mostly melting, though, so it was easy to walk on with just our boots. I was also hiking in bare boots for the first time in a long time, pants without a base layer, and a Techwick long sleeve, so it was nice to have minimal layers on as we leave winter behind and experience a slightly earlier than usual spring in the ADK. Of course, I don't want to jinx it, since just 2 years ago we got a good foot of snow right around May 1st. And after all, it is the Adirondacks, and it doesn't abide by seasonal norms or your conventional weather patterns. Anything goes here in the Adirondack Park, especially this time of year. Since we didn't put micro spikes on, we were still able to make our way up the trail without much struggle as the ice was minimal. After 0.2 miles, the trail crosses over some railroad tracks, which is fun and gives this mountain a unique vibe, since I can't really think of any other mountain trail in the Adirondacks that I've hiked that crosses over railroad tracks. From here, you're back in the woods, and you'll gain a little bit of elevation during the 1.7-mile approach, but it's mostly flatter or negligible climbs. So I'm about a quarter of a mile in, currently walking through an amazing pine forest. Looks very much like what you'd think the Pacific Northwest is like. And you can see Ray Brook down to the right through the trees. Water's nice and blue. At this point, there's no snow anywhere. There's a little ice to begin with, but nothing major. But right now, you can't really tell that it's not the middle of the summer. Super green, enormously tall trees. Very nice vibes right now. This 1.7 mile stretch, however, is amazing, and I can't stress enough how much I love it. The trail is narrow in some places, and it cuts through an enormous pine forest. So much green everywhere. I loved it. Enormous telephone pole trees all around you, red pines, white pines, spruce trees, cherry trees, and then other stretches of walking through dozens of balsams and spruce groves, which feel like you're walking through a Christmas tree farm. Man, I love Christmas tree farms. And this is why I personally enjoy this hike so much. I love these woods. It feels more like something you'd experience in the Pacific Northwest because this area is so massive and so green. Eventually, you'll come out to the river, which has a very nice wooden bridge with a great view of Scarface to your left. Even if you don't want to hike to the summit, just walking into the bridge and hanging out in this small clearing is worth your time, in my opinion. It's a great spot. And once over the bridge, you're back walking along giant spruce and pine trees on a still relatively flat stretch. And eventually the trail comes to a large concrete foundation deep in the woods. This must have had an old cabin of some sort on it at some point in time because it's pretty far back there. There was also an enormous rusty water tank of some sort and an old rusty bike frame. All right, we're just over a half hour in. We are now at the little concrete foundation here deep in the woods. There's a nice big opening, super cool area. Clearly there used to be some sort of building of sorts here. Now there's an old bicycle frame and a big barrel of some sort on top of this concrete foundation, but we're gonna go around it. This area kind of has a, like Hansel and Gretel cabin in the woods kind of vibe to it right now, which is pretty cool. I'm into it. But we're gonna keep going down the trail and soon we'll be banging a left and then we will start climbing. From this point, you'll bear to the left to follow the trail. Do not go right down some other tracks. Go left. And then a few feet later, you'll make a hard left as you're met with a trail sign pointing left. This is just over 1.5 miles into the hike, and at this point, the trail will start to climb up and the sounds of the river can be heard up ahead. So we walked up the trail towards the river, which was a bit muddy, but overall not too bad. This is the point where you'll start gaining elevation. For the next 1.3 miles, you'll gain basically all of the elevation on the day, more or less. A little over 1,200 feet until you get onto the summit ridge for the final push. Therefore, this is where the harder work begins. We are 58 minutes in to this hike, and we're hiking up now in this open hardwood forest. Lots of leaves everywhere, following the red trail markers. Birds are chirping. Not many green trees anymore. Pretty much all bare.
Sun's out.
Bare trees here. Hardwoods. Sun is shining. Sky is blue. You got some Simpsons type white puffy clouds. Pretty awesome. This point in the hike is great though because the woods change. Unlike the whole approach, these woods are filled with hardwood trees, both big and small. So the trail crosses over the river at one point but goes up alongside the water for a good amount of time as you follow the red trail markers. We did, however, find ourselves crunching along last year's leaves, which covered the entire trail. The woods are open, especially this time of year since the leaves haven't bloomed, so visibility around the forest was very high. We continued hiking up very steadily, but never too steep overall, and came to a stretch with tons of birch trees on the left and what felt like hundreds of green moss-covered rocks on the right. It had a super cool vibe. Josh and I called it Iceland because it's what we picture Iceland looking like with all the green rocks. Of course, neither of us have been there, so we really can't confirm that, but it's just what we called this area, for whatever reason. And the abundance of birch trees was cool too. Tons of them. The trail is certainly climbing by this point, crunching on leaves, and there's tons of mossy covered rocks all over the place, which is cool since there's not a lot of color at this point, but all the mossy rocks are pretty neat, and there's just like hundreds of them. So we're making our way around this slope here. You can see Mackenzie through the trees right now. The trail climbs the northern slope of the peak, and there were some nice views behind us seen through the trees. Mackenzie was visible, as was the lake down below, so not too bad. And with the gradual nature of this hike and the very enjoyable scenery, I just really like this mountain overall. You're never breathing too hard, just the right amount of enjoyment with very little pain in the lungs and feet. Once climbing up alongside the rock face slides to the left, aka the Scar. After all, the mountain is named Scarface. We found ourselves surrounded by that white, fluffy, wet stuff that I thought we left behind for greener pastures. Snow. We found the snow.
So the higher we get, the snow is now making an appearance, as you may have guessed would be the case. Although there was lots of ice, sidewalk type terrain at the bottom, and there was a good chunk of time with no snow anywhere in sight. But we're at the side of the slide going up Scarface right now, and there's leftover snow throughout the woods here, but rotten snow, it's melting. But now we see some snow as we're at the side of the slide, continuing up as it gets steeper.
This past season's snow wasn't quite gone yet up here like it was down lower on the mountain, and we could see the trail ahead was going to require some micro spikes, so we put it off as long as we could, and we had no choice but to pop them on. We had a good run, but it was time to put them on. And we actually could have made it slightly further without them, but it was a good time to stop and slap them on our feet.
Just over 2.5 miles in, we're approaching the final push to the summit. It's definitely steeper now, more snow. We've been putting it off as long as we can, but it is clearly time to put the micro spikes on. Though we did make it 2,600 feet elevation, and we made it 2.5 miles without putting them on, but it's clear we need to put them on now. So here we go. The final push to the summit.
Josh's spike, however, upon getting them out, turned out to be a little bit broken, but we were able to get them fixed up good enough to use. If we would have had a multi-tool in either of our packs to specifically utilize the pliers, it would have been much easier to fix them. So for the future, not a bad idea to have one of those in your backpack. And anyone who just said to themselves, "No way, Jay, man, that would be way too heavy in my pack. That's just too heavy of a tool." You need to chill out. It's not that heavy, and man, would it have been super useful right here, instead of having to bend metal with 2 rocks that we found. After spiking up, we kept moving, and at this point, the trail wrapped around a steeper section before we pushed our way up to the ledge with the views. There's one ledge with terrific views on this mountain, just under the summit ridge, and it's definitely the place to spend your time at for the day. Getting up to this rocky ledge required some climbing up various icy stretches, followed by completely bare woods, and then some more icy ledges, and then some more bare woods, but that was the story of the day period, and hiking in general during the changing of the seasons up here. A couple of these icy stretches and climbs in particular were definitely easier going up than they were going to be coming down as well, so we had that to look forward to. A lot of the ice up here was like plastic though, so it was very grippy, fortunately. We eventually climbed up onto the open ledge with the views to the west. Great views, actually. However, we only stayed a minute or two and kept going since we planned to come back down here to eat a snack after summiting and take a break before the full descent. After all, we weren't quite at the summit yet.
It is 12:30. We just made our way onto the ledge here on Scarface. We're about half a mile, I think, from the summit, which is a wooded summit. But we are here on the big rock ledge, which is the major views for the day. Very clear. You see Tupper Lake in the distance as well. This is the best view of the day here on Scarface. A lovely hike, but we got a little ways to go, and then we will be at the true summit, which is marked by a little Scarface trail marker. All right, Josh is leaving me, so time to go.
The ledge is roughly half a mile to the true summit, so a mile round trip back to this lovely rock face. At this point, the trail just moves along the ridge. Minimal elevation gain as you wind your way along the trees. Nothing super exciting, and I know sometimes people get to the ledge and they don't even carry on to the true summit. I think you should always continue to the summit and not miss out on walking along this ridge. It's a nice part of the hike, and you're back in a very green pine tree forest, so it's still quite enjoyable in my opinion. It's also relatively flat, so the hard work for your lungs is finished by this point, so really not a big deal. We carried on through the woods, following the trail and the old footsteps in the partially melted snow.